Welcome to this panel discussion on community engagement as it relates to the DC Vision Zero program. Our panelist presenters are two DC government staff members deeply engaged daily in efforts to improve safety for all on the district's roads and sidewalks. They are Christine Mayeur, DC Vision Zero Transportation Specialist, and Charles Turner, who heads up the DDOT Automated Traffic Enforcement, or ATE program that runs the speed cameras. Two community members deeply familiar with safety programs and interventions or techniques used to bring about change will comment on each presentation. They are Ameen Beale, longtime Ward 8 resident and co-chair of the DC Pedestrian Advisory Council, and Eileen McCarthy, who is America Walk's representative to the International Federation of Pedestrians. This is not a panel initiated or sponsored per se by the Pedestrian Advisory Council or PAC. Ameen and I, Heather Foote, are current co-chairs and participating in our own personal capacity. Eileen is a former PAC chair and served on that advisory board for 9 years. In the panelist speaker background on the website, there is a link that we put in to the DC Vision Zero 2022 update. It is the frame for this discussion. Why? Because the general public, not just those who closely follow traffic safety and related policy deliberations, need to know the tools government is using to alter dangerous streets and speeding to achieve Vision Zero goals, and how residents can effectively engage so the general public can understand improvements attempted and achieved, the great distance still to reach Vision Zero, and exactly how the tools or interventions and community involvement mechanisms work or are supposed to work. We have a very tight schedule, so I want to move to Charles Turner, who, given a schedule conflict, will present first. We're glad he could join us. Again, his 10-minute presentation will be followed by comments and questions, first by Ameen Beale from Ward 8, and then Eileen McCarthy, who is in Ward 3. A final note, information is power, and a part of community engagement is addressing information inequality, one of the rationales for this particular panel. Another way to state what Charlie Wilson just said about taking a public health approach to Vision Zero. Charles, please take it away.
Heather, good morning to Heather and the whole entire team. I want to thank WABA and the whole team for inviting us to participate. One thing, I don't know, I'll give you a little bit of background. I've been in photo enforcement industry since its inception back in the early 2000s. And my first project, just as a training scenario, was in Washington, D.C. And I was on the corporate side of the house, so I was very close to the development and implementation of the technologies, starting all the way back, for those who might remember, wet film cameras, because believe it or not, that's what we started with, and it was in the arena of red light enforcement. I had the great opportunity through my experience to travel up and down the East Coast and all the way west to the Mississippi implementing these type programs, and I've been really excited and thrilled that after touring and joining government in Baltimore City, Maryland, to join the District of Columbia's program. And I must say, a pat on the back to the entire team. I think we're one of the most coordinated and future thinking organizations around safety and all of its components. Because as Heather said, and as Charlie said earlier, and as Elizabeth said, it has to be a orchestrated, planned and collaborative effort to reach the goals that we all have, which the ultimate is no fatalities due to vehicular activity here in the District of Columbia. Currently, we know historically, the program existed under the Metropolitan Police Department for almost over 20 years. And over the last 2 years, starting in October 2021, our division, Automated Traffic Enforcement, moved and became a part of the District Department of Transportation. And it has been an eye-opening and thrilling opportunity, because I think we do fit better in this environment. In this environment, we have our partners like Vision Zero and Vision Zero and Move DC, all of us aligned in ATE being one tool in the toolbox. I know citizens go into the 311 system and make recommendations for cameras, but what's the beauty of being part of DDOT is that we don't just look at automated traffic enforcement, but we also look at other tools like speed bumps, locations, data gathering needs, selection process, now the recommendations that come through our traffic safety assessment program here within DDOT, and then they pass those recommendations over to my organization. And the traffic safety organization and analysis team has been very, very important in the site selection process, because in the old days, we used to just go put a camera where a crash occurred. Now we don't only just look at crashes, but we also look at the speeds, the traffic counts. We reviewed 5 years of the crash history at the location. We also looked at see if buses and bikes are being used in this particular area where we have a concern or a request for consideration. And then we also look and consider the actual land use. Do we have schools in the area? Do we have churches? Do we have recreational areas? You know, and this has been a very serious consideration considering the renaissance has gone on here in the city in the last 20 years. We also look at overall speed data analysis, and then we go out and determine, my team, the automated traffic team, once a recommendation is made for a automated traffic camera, we go out and decide, is it really feasible? Are we not going to create an ADA type environmental issue where folks who are handicapped lose access to sidewalks and things of that nature, where we may want to place a portable unit? We make sure in the public relations realm that signage is there. You know, we're not running a stealth operation here. Never have. We're going to elevate our public engagement pieces, as Charlie spoke to. You know, I love a program that he did where we went back to the basics and hung door hangers in areas where it would be a direct impact. And, you know, ATE is looking at that type of scenario as we move into our new era. And I'll speak to that in a moment. Every time we put up new locations, we're also putting out a press release. Old school, it used to be just the Washington Post. Now it's a multi-level, multi-tier public relations piece that we put out way ahead the activation of the camera. And anytime that we put a new camera at a new location, we make sure we have a minimum of a 30-day warning period where you do get a notice that you violated, but there's not any fine attached to it. So again, we add a public relations and an educational piece to the program. After that, the camera is activated and we begin a 30-day warning period, as I said. So that in a capsule tells you, and you can send in additional questions about the site selection process, but I find it to be very complete. It gives us what I've always liked to have for citizens, and that's a story of why. Why we want to get better at telling them how the camera works, because there's been some controversy in the past around information sharing about how the actual technology is operates, how that technology is quality assured, how that technology is constantly on a daily basis being tested, and how components within those technologies, particularly the radar, are taken out and tested at least on a yearly basis. And all that information is available for the citizens to review. You know, we are not running a stealth operation, and our new mantra is going to be driving is a privilege. And we want people to be educated and provided with the information necessary to know exactly what the rules around driving within the District of Columbia are. I ran into this particularly in dealing with stop sign enforcement, where folks really didn't know that you actually had to come to a complete stop, meaning that your wheels stop moving, not just that your taillights illuminated. So, you know, we got some distance that we want to go. I think this is a very strategic time for automated traffic enforcement. I'm sure you've heard in the media and all the other news platforms that we put out a new contract. It's been awarded, and you're going to see a technological increase and upgrade. We talked about someone always approaches me about where they got denied or we could not find it feasible to put a speed camera or a stop sign camera. And we're making a gallant effort to put those cameras up and out of the way on a pole, which helps to mitigate situations where we could not get a good line of sight. Because one thing in this particular scenario, we want to make sure that when you open if you get a violation or a warning, that when you open it, there's an educational piece to it, as well as, most importantly, that you can definitively look at the images, look at the video, which most people don't know. Video in most instances are provided right now. It is provided for stop sign and for red light camera running infractions, you can actually go online and see the before, the during, and the after of the incident, and educate yourself and determine, do you feel that you did violate in that particular realm? So, you know, I think the big piece people have been asking about site selection. We're working very aggressively, probably before the end of the year. We'll be able to have some information where if you made a request, that you can find out how that request lived through a decision-making process. So we're working very aggressively on that. Also, too, you can see an elevation in our public relations pieces. You'll see some elements already went out on Twitter in reference to the upcoming bus lane enforcement product that we're putting out and supporting as far as enforcement. The cameras are going to be on the WMATA buses. They will pass that evidence to my team here that's have over, on the average, 10 years of experience in reviewing evidence related to automated traffic violations. And then if the violation has occurred in the bus lane scenario, is if you park or drive in a designated bus lane, or if you're parked in a designated bus zone, which includes the bus stop. So those will be clearly advertised. We'll have some, in this particular case, we're going to do a 45-day warning period as well as a very well orchestrated public relations campaign that will go with that. So you can send any questions and we will direct you to our webpage with this additional information related to the new technology, which is going to be bus lane enforcement. Additionally, in the fall, in the late summer, early fall, you'll also see us going around the city improving and upgrading all the existing speed, stop sign, and all the speed and stop sign equipment will be replaced and upgraded. And then we'll be expanding the program with a target, as Charlie has spoken about and other members earlier, focused on enforcing the enforcement zones in our high injury network, improving safety around our schools, and overall improving safety across the city using the ATE application. We'll also be resurrecting truck enforcement in the area across the city and neighborhoods that have complained that trucks are blazing through their neighborhood, rattling their windows and damaging their property. So we'll be working on all those type of elements, and those will be clearly provided in educational pieces for all citizens to see. And that's basically it. You'll see a rapid expansion. It'll be well orchestrated. It'll be well advertised, and you'll be able to see the results. And that's something that, as we spoke to earlier, I think Charlie did in reference to data. We have data-driven scenarios on the back end, and many citizens and leaders have asked, okay, what have been the results? A study that we did about 18 months to 2 years ago, looking at existing cameras, saw that injury crashes decreased overall by 30% with what we already had at some designated locations in the city currently. We want to improve that number tremendously. Also, it needs to be understood too that if we put or identify a location for a camera, not necessarily does it actually enforce citizens that just live in that neighborhood, because it should be understood too that most of the violators particularly come from Maryland at over 40%, Virginia in the next highest category, and only a little bit over 20% of the violators historically in the program are actually are violating using vehicles registered in the District of Columbia. So we need to stay very much aware of that scenario. And we do communicate that across to our regional partners. So that's all I really had in our particular presentation. Does anyone have, and we can pick up any additional information related to ATE and the question and answer pieces of the program. But as I said in summary, be prepared. Bus lane enforcement coming right now. Right after that, you'll also see an upgrade of all the stop sign, the red light and the speed scenarios. And in the fall, you'll see an application put into place to protect our children with school bus stop arm enforcement.
Thank you very much. You're right on target on the time, Charles.
Thank you.
So Ameen will step in next.
And Charles, thank you for that presentation and good morning.
Morning.
I just had a couple of follow-up questions. So I know that you talked about kind of like the public awareness campaign and the process that goes into like site selection for the cameras.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to get like sort of I go to a lot of meetings in Ward 8 and I live a block from Alabama Avenue, which I'm sure is probably a higher injury corridor as well. And, the dominant narrative in the community, and a lot of it, is bad faith, is that the cameras are, put in poor neighborhoods and are biased and all of these things. And I think quite the opposite, for some of the reasons that you named, because it doesn't, our communities are used as flyover country for suburban commuters, right? And people zip through our community, destroy things, do everything, and keep moving. So how can you kind of neutralize that dominant narrative? And I'm thinking of, like, when you talk about community engagement, like one thing, and I've said this, to neighbors and everything before, if you think about like side by side, like it's almost to me like number one, the ATEs in a way, because it's enforcement, protect the community, and it takes a bias out of it, unlike a traffic stop from a law enforcement officer. But on the flip side of that, yeah, how can we just kind of like neutralize, just that narrative in a sense of, like, even if it's a campaign around, I think about like side by side. If I were to get pulled over for a similar offense, let's say I'm going 30 miles over and I get pulled over by a cop and so I have to get a ticket, I risk the insurance like hike, I have to go to court, possibly hire a lawyer, pay court costs, like all of these things side by side versus like the price of a ticket, right? And like, how can you kind of use that to kind of push the narrative that this isn't a biased process, and also like maybe even just publishing data around why we selected this site, hey, 13 people, were injured here last month on this street, like this, and like just kind of like broadcast the why, so there's an appearance of like more transparency around the process.
Thanks so much for that question, Ameen. And kind of, sort of, and directly, you answered a lot of the question with your question.
That was the goal. Okay.
Yeah, number one in the role that I play is public awareness. I think particularly, I'm not afraid of community engagement. I love to go out in community, and it's just ironic because we just put a camera over the last 6 months on Alabama Avenue from a request from a citizen, and the camera has a very high volume. I think we got to reiterate back to the citizens. Number one, driving is a privilege. Number two, in the educational pieces, what are the rules? What are the rules of speeding? And, how do they calculate the posted speeds? How did they come up with that? We want to educate the public on how that process is done. And then how do we enforce that? Because it's not, if it says it's 30 miles an hour, it's not triggering at 30, it's triggering at least 11 miles over that particular scenario before any ticket is issued. And then again, as you said, to be better at, and this new technology will allow that, that to be done, is to talk about the aftermath. How much did how much in the past we could only say how many violations dropped in a certain period of time. Now we'll be able to say how many violations dropped, but also how much the traffic slowed down overall for non-violators, and then be more transparent about who got the tickets as far as maybe zip codes are concerned. Because remember, the camera can't see who's driving. And that was done purposely. These were built on the East Coast and on premise of a parking ticket. If your car is parked and the meter runs out, they don't know who you are, what you are. All they know, that's your car, due to, depending upon what the registration is. And I think we need to re-emphasize that. It goes to the vehicle owner. Two, we don't know what the owner looks like. We have no profile information or anything of that nature. And then it gets away from, like what you said, police engagement, which sometimes escalates. So it removes all of that. And I think for the citizens, we need to just remind them of that. Number two, we need to emphasize to them that 90% of the requests for photo enforcement, even if we decide to do speed bumps or something else, most people are saying we need a camera here. Those are coming from citizens, those are coming from ANCs, those are coming from council members, they're coming from folks like yourself. And we need to be very transparent and clear. And what we have committed to do is, over, like I said, by the end of the year or more, we'll be able to say, okay, you made this request, this was the process, this is what we came up with, and this is why. And if the camera is placed out there, this is the aftermath. As I stated earlier in an earlier study that's a little aged, but still good, and the only in a study that I always point back to, where we put speed cameras in the past, 30% reduction in injury accidents. That's what we want to build upon and go with. And like you said, have a citizen be able to go in and say, okay, the camera on Alabama Avenue started here, now it's down to here, and then make sure we give that information to the appropriate parties, no matter who it is. I had a pastor call for some information. We provided that, and he shared it with the church. And it is all about information sharing. It's all about giving more data. It's all about more transparency where appropriate.
Charles, we're going to move now to Eileen's comments and questions. Thank you very much, you and Ameen, so far.
No problem. And Ameen, feel comfortable to email me directly if any additional questions.
Okay, absolutely. I appreciate you. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Charles, so much for the presentation.
You're welcome.
I'm going to start with a sort of a broad question. You've been involved in these programs for more than 20 years, right? And so how's the past experience with the program and DC's past experience inform the next 20 years? Where do you see us going?
A more data-driven scenario, which is already starting on the front end, but then the data sharing on the back end. What was the result of the program? Also, too, an opportunity which we've already experimented with the old equipment, which we're going to accelerate with the new equipment, is to rotate the cameras around so that we get a better coverage using the assets that we have. You know, there are many intersections, many streetscapes in the city that need enforcement, and we're going to rotate using data and select so that we move the cameras around. It won't be a stealth operation. Like I said, people will know that they're moving. People will know where they are. And we'll, like I said, on any brand new sites, we will always do the warning period so that people are aware. And we've learned that, you know, all of us are human. All of us are creatures of behaviors and habits. If we know there's a camera there, even in our high injury networks, people will slow down where the camera is. But the minute they feel they're outside the enforcement zone, then they'll speed back up. And that's where we see the crashes move along the high injury network. If they think there's enforcement up and down the entire network, then there's less of a chance that they're going to speed up at all. So that's something that we learned is a better application of the data that the camera captures of itself. The camera is watching all the traffic. However, we just primarily focused on who were the violators. We want to focus on changing the behavior overall, and we're going to report out on that. I think that's going to be a significant change that we've had. Also, too, to have smaller, less intrusive type installations, have more things up on a pole rather than down on the streetscape, so that we have better lines of sight. Because if we don't know, if we not say me, you, and Heather all violate, but only because of the technology recovery time to go to the next violation was so slow due to the old technology, now it would be faster technology. And me, you, and Heather will all be prompted to slow down, be prompted to stop at the stop sign, be prompted to not drive out trucks in truck restricted areas because all of us were notified and got that nudge. So those are the technological advancements that you will see. Better detection, faster recovery, more tickets initially, but then more impact because all those involved were notified that they committed that violation. Also, too, the re-implementation of the warning period, using believe it or not, the back of the warning used to be blank. Now we're going to put educational materials on the back of the warnings so that, again, people can be notified. And, you know, someone said, oh, if I get that, I'm going to hang that on my refrigerator so the whole household will know they need to slow down. So, you know, we're making smart, intelligent, holistic, human-focused type moves. And sometimes I tell folks, technology sometimes takes us into a new realm, and then we don't ever go back and reflect upon the simplistic things that we can do to get our messages across. And then another thing, too, is not just to publish in one platform, but to use multiple platforms to communicate the results, the why, the how, and more important that citizens want, what are the results? These, and we go back to the previous question with Ameen, you know, no, it was not put here for any kind of negative impact in the BOPA communities. It was put here because it was, one, it was requested, and two, we can define the need. So those are things that we've learned over the last 20 years.
Okay. So let me just follow up a little bit on that. So how many more new cameras do you think we're going to be getting?
If you add in all of the bus lane cameras and everything, it'll probably be almost over 200 cameras. Okay,
and about how many of those do you know will be speed cameras?
The majority will be speed.
Okay. Will you be expanding to other parts of the city? Like, you know, the contrast to Ameen's point is, you know, my ward 3 doesn't have many speed cameras. And people, you know, it's like people want speed cameras on the street I live on, which is a, you know, it's a local street, and I'm doubtful we're going to get them. But I will say I do hear people drag racing on Massachusetts Avenue in Nebraska most weekend nights. And, you know, I think we could use some over here too. Do you think we're going to get, and we're, you know, we're not.
We're going to use the data. We're going to use input like what you said, because citizens and believe it or not, MPD who's out on the street, they've never been wrong. If you have a focused scenario, there's speed racing on the weekends, then we're going to make an attempt to address that. But we'll always start with the data and the overall need. but that's what we need. We need that kind of input that you just gave us, a date, a time, and a place. And then we can, I mean, you know, we do have portable cameras that we can move around to address where they're speeding just on the weekends. So those are the kind of imaginative things that we can do, Eileen.
Right. And of course, on Connecticut Avenue, we've had, you know, at least 2, maybe 3 speed related crashes in the last couple of years, which
they're already on our radar as part of our high injury network strategy.
Right.
We have time for one more comment or question, I mean, before turning to Christine Mayeur.
I understood. Okay. So I think you said there's some information available to the public already about testing of equipment and radar testing. Where do we find that?
Really, the people that have access to that are people that got violations through the adjudication services process.
Okay. So, you know, I would say that, you know, you're working on a goal of getting analyses out by the end of the year. So I guess, you know, my comment would be the more information you make public, the easier it is for people like me and Heather and Ameen and anybody else to talk to the public about, you know, the issues involved and how easy it is to find information about the program. You know,
no problem. As I told Ameen, when you have ideas on communications, and I already wrote down what you just said about the communication, just send that directly to me and I'll make sure you are in the communications loop.
Okay.
What we're doing right now is the most powerful thing we can do, other than talking to citizens face to face, but organizing to talk to citizens and to engage the community. This is the great platform to grow that opportunity from.
It's so also, it's like, you know, day to day, I encounter people who are, you know, on it's revenue generating narrative. And, you know, it's like, I remember some of what we talk about when I talk to you and others about the cameras, but it would be really nice to have a written resource where I could refer people. So
we're gonna have something for you and for all the citizens very soon.
That sounds good. Thank you. Thank you, Heather.
But thanks so much, team. Heather, you know, I appreciate your invitation. Always keep me in the loop. I'm always available when I'm not available. And I squeezed this in today because it is so important to me personally and so important to ATE and to DDOT.
Thank you very much. We are operating under tremendous time constraints. Charles, I will send you an important question that came through from the public, and we're going to turn now to Christine Mayeur, speaking for the DC Vision Zero program. Take it away, Christine.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Charles. I have a couple slides. I'm going to share my screen here. Right. Get in presentation mode. Okay. So I'm just going to provide an overview of the update. I've presented the update to, well, hold on. Good morning, everybody. My name is Christine Mayeur. I'm a transportation specialist with the DC Vision Zero office. And I've been with DDOT or DC government for about 2 years now. And prior to that, worked on Alexandria's Vision Zero and Complete Streets program. And before that, worked on DC's Vision Zero plan in 2015 and 2016, and as well as City of Alexandria's and a couple other jurisdictions as well. I'm a transportation planner by training and have been in the industry for a while now. So it's given me a good chance to sort of put lessons learned into this update. So I hope you all get to read it, but I'll give some overview here, just to make sure the points come across. First, why do we use a Vision Zero approach? So obviously to prioritize human life and health. The goal is to save and protect lives first and foremost. Not all crashes on the street and not all street conditions lead to serious injury and death. And to do that goal of prioritizing human life and health, we have to prioritize the situations that lead to death and serious injury. That doesn't mean that someone needs to die or be seriously injured for us to focus on something. It means that we look at these as priorities and we look at the street conditions that led to that as priorities. We take a data-driven prioritization approach, meaning that we use data, crash data about our street, data from public input even, and research that we've seen over the years about the social conditions, the socioeconomic conditions of crashes to determine and prioritize areas that are most critical and most in need of safety interventions, and prioritizing those for multi-agency focus. It's a fact, and Charlie stated earlier, that wards 7 and 8 continue to see the highest rates of death and serious injury, as well as risky conditions, and are therefore a higher safety priority, point blank. All hands on deck approach. Vision Zero is intended to be a multi-agency response to the crisis of traffic safety. DDOT was a lead agency for a long time, and yes, DDOT has a lot of focus on Vision Zero and a lot of input and responsibility for Vision Zero, but they're not the only ones. MPD, DPW, all of our agencies that are part of the Demois cluster and others across the city have a role in advancing Vision Zero. The safe systems approach tells us that we strengthen all parts of our transportation system to avoid people being killed. And we see it as kind of a Swiss cheese model, which I'll get into in a second. So all this to say, Vision Zero is not everything traffic safety. And this is something that I've learned as a lesson, and I'm trying to get across the agencies and across the initiative. Our previous approach to traffic safety of sort of doing a little bit everywhere has not shown the reductions in death and serious injuries that we have expected or wanted to see. So we focus on the conditions, the locations, the behaviors that lead to death and serious injury. If you're reading Inclusive Transportation by Veronica Davis, then you'll read her emergency room analogy about how when we look at what's a priority, we approach it similar to the triage of patients in an emergency room. So there are people that are in the room that are waiting to be seen, but if someone comes in with a critical life-threatening injury, they are moved to the front of the line. And that's similar to the locations and the priority that we see across the board. And then in terms of reaching our goal, prioritization is really focusing on kind of an apt metaphor, the wildfire issues that we're seeing. Are we using buckets of water and small treatments here and there to address issues? Or are we taking tankers and looking at corridors as a whole and implementing safety along those corridors? So part of the plan is really centering equity in this. So research shows that nationwide, we have a disproportionate impact of crashes, especially fatalities and serious injuries on BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, low-income communities, and populations experiencing poverty or the unhoused. Centering equity means prioritizing transportation investments to rectify past disinvestment in these wards and neighborhoods that need it most. In the plan, you can see we've broken out what are the injury and fatality rates per ward according to population. And the numbers are clear that wards 7 and 8 and 5 as well disproportionately impacted by crashes. So safe systems approach. This is the Swiss cheese model. I won't go into everything, but we think of things as a layered system. So the first layer being safe road users, the knowledge and the sort of behavioral component. And if that fails and someone gets through that sort of Swiss cheese hole, does their vehicle prevent them from killing someone? Then if that fails, are they operating at least at a safe speed so that person is not seriously injured or killed? And then does the road then support that safe speed and force people to slow down? And then the very last is post-crash care, so that if everything else fails, we have a golden hour of post-crash care where that person can get the care that they need to save their lives. The key principles of a safe system are in the plan. I won't go through those in detail, but I'll quickly go through some of the pieces. So safe streets, street design influences behavior. It just does. It makes it feel where if you're on the interstate or a freeway, you feel more apt to speed. Whereas if you're on a neighborhood street where you've got parked vehicles or really close houses or a narrow cross section, you don't feel as likely or have the ability to speed. And so the district can design our roads to make operating at safe speeds intuitive, so that people don't even need to think about this, so that we don't need to put, ATE cameras on all of our local streets. We should design local streets and other streets where it's intuitive to operate at a safe speed. This will also reduce the severity and frequency of crashes as well. Reduce exposure to crash risks and forces by reducing the overall speeds of our system. We can reduce the crash forces that people experience, and as we know, the human body is vulnerable to crash forces. And then reducing conflicts between street users. So separating street users, we've all got to use the same space. How do we separate and protect street users, especially more vulnerable users and vulnerable populations that are using them outside of a vehicle? Safe speeds, I think this is obvious to most folks here, but moving people slowly is moving them safely. We're moving people. The goal of a transportation system is access and mobility. As long as we're moving them slowly, we can move them safely. And we're recognizing the limitations on a human body. Safe people, this is something I want to get out there as well. Our educational efforts should center youth and seniors because they're overrepresented in injury and fatal crash data, but a person's responsibility for safety on the street is directly proportional to their capacity to cause harm. So pedestrians, people in wheelchairs having the least ability to cause harm are sort of more of the protected user on the street, whereas people in larger vehicles, faster vehicles, heavier vehicles have more of a capacity for harm and are therefore more responsible for the safety on our streets.
Christine, you have about a minute left. We're on a terrible tight schedule, so please go ahead.
Okay. I'll quickly go through. I only have like one or two left. Safe vehicles. We know that the design, weight, and size of vehicles is a predictor in the severity and survivability of crashes. Here's some data that US DOT put out. And what we can do as a city is look at our fleets, our registration, and our regulation and enforcement, and work with federal partners to support safer vehicle standards, as well as new technology coming out for our vehicles. And then post-crash care, again, the last sort of layer on this, making sure that people have the life-saving care that they need, traffic incident management to protect our first responders, and then going through the process of forensic and criminal investigation and making sure our crash data and records are collected and accurate. So with that, I will stop sharing and then we can cover the point.
Great. So we're going to turn to Eileen. Ameen we knew it had a conflict, so the comment, question, session part is going to be handled by Eileen. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Christine. That was a great presentation. I think I want to, safe systems approach, it constitutes a huge change from what we've been doing in the past, right? And so for those of us who have been on the bad end of what we've been doing in the past, it's really easy to grasp and to see that it's a better approach. But for people who have benefited, as with many things, with people who have benefited from the decades-long approach to safety that elevated drivers and people in cars over people not in cars, how do we reach them? I mean, some are easy to reach. Most of the people I know who work on this are drivers as well as being pedestrians and bicyclists. So they get it. But there are a lot of people out there who just don't, and they don't understand, how we're switching, why behavior is not the focus anymore, why there are so many changes being made in response that they don't like the flex posts and so forth. How do we reach those people?
It's a tough question because the I think of it kind of like anti-smoking campaigns. So the reduction in smoking that we've seen is a little bit behavioral change, but it's also the things that cause that behavioral change. So not allowing smoking on airplanes, not allowing smoking in restaurants or hotels, or, and the policy support with that, the sort of insurance implications of whether you're a smoker or not a smoker. And then the societal thing, like it's social norming of it. A lot of people don't want to be around smokers because of the smell, and you can sort of tell when a person's a smoker. So it's sort of a combined effort, and it is hard to reach drivers, but I think we have to do it from this sort of multifaceted approach where we are right-sizing streets for all day capacity versus the peak of the peak, where they have previously benefited. And there's the internet adage of when you're accustomed to supremacy, equality feels like oppression, which is typical for kind of white supremacy and racism, but I think applies to our transportation system as well. When we're designing primarily for vehicles and moving commuters as quickly as possible, we're forgetting our own people who are being disproportionately impacted. So,
Christine, could I interrupt here, because we are dealing with, in some terms, a more general audience. For the broad audience, what does right sizing the streets mean? There are a lot of people, not maybe necessarily the fast drivers, but ordinary folks who really, they have no reason to understand how these things work. So could you describe right sizing, what you mean there for?
Right sizing is really balancing the capacity that we design for our streets. So how much curb to curb space you have, how many lanes we have, and so on, with the all day demand for the use of that space. So it's kind of like, instead of buying a house for the one time of year your entire family comes to Thanksgiving, you buy a house for the actual size that you need and the space that you're going to use and can maintain for the other 364 or 3 days a year that you don't have all of those folks in town. So think of that as kind of right sizing, where it's road diets, essentially. It's reusing the road space to move more people more efficiently and more safely in different modes. And that meets our safety, our climate, and other goals as well.
Okay, so I know, there's a later panel that's going to discuss the traffic safety investigations in a little bit more detail, but I'd like to touch on those here, especially the question of equity. This is another change that was, met with mixed reaction, I think, because of how it was communicated. And a lot of people, including, I said, people in my community, just use it as an example, don't understand, why it is that issues they've been working on, requests they've been working on for, quite a while, and that they had trouble getting through the ANC and through the community are now on the back, sort of on the back bench. How do we better address that and better communicate, the reasons for the changes in these approaches?
Yeah, it's tough. I think we've put out a lot of material for folks to look at to help explain the reasoning behind it and explain how we are prioritizing requests. And I want to be clear that requests are responsive rather than data-driven. But in an effort to be more data-driven, to actually prioritize those communities that we're not seeing the number of even traffic safety input requests get addressed, because other communities were submitting multiple at a time, getting directors to come walk with them, things like that. Because other communities didn't have the access or privilege or connections, whatever you want to call it, to have that happen, we were seeing a disproportionate allocation of resources and safety treatments, even at the micro level that TSIs address across the board. So in an effort to make it more equitable, to better use our resources and to address even for the safety request, the responsive part of the equation, to make that more data driven. At least we added this new prioritization model. It's a better model, but it's based on what I did in Alexandria when I had 2 staff people working to address hundreds and hundreds of requests that I would get for complete streets treatments every year. And so within the budget that we have, within the staff that we have, and also not forgetting the big sort of tanker truck treatments of addressing our high injury network work, how do we make all of these programs more equitable, more focused on safety, and more data driven? So that was the intent of it. And yeah.
Okay. And can you just briefly go over the process that's in use now?
Sure. So people can still request, put in a traffic safety input request through 311. That goes into our dashboard immediately, and the prioritization model. So every quarter, we run the prioritization model because obviously we know things change very rapidly in DC. So we're updating our base data layers that inform the prioritization. And then we are rerunning the model every quarter to pick 200 high priority locations from those requests to focus our staff effort and the budget that we have for traffic safety inputs. And then all the other ones that were not in that top 200 stay in the list and get added to the model for the next round. So each time that we run it, no one's request is closed. It may say closed from 311, but that's just because it's added to this different system and they don't talk well together just from a sort of software standpoint.
Yeah, I don't want to get into belabor the close point, but I think that is very confusing for people because they think it's closed. I mean, it happens with a lot of things, not just this. Anyway.
And a way for everyone to see, so we have a traffic safety input dashboard. You can see all of the requests that are completed, that are pending, that are being worked on right now, and then the entire sort of, in the software world, they call it backlog, but all of the requests that have been put in that have not yet been selected for the top 200.
But most people, to object a bit, are not going to go, they don't know this, first of all, and they're not going to go and visit the DDOT website on this. And so there really needs to be multiple forms of communication on this ABC of how the process works, and what Eileen was just saying, which is, what happened to my request? They're not going to visit the DDOT website, the vast majority of people.
Yeah, and I mean, luckily DDOT is unique in that we have an entire team devoted to community engagement and connecting our communities with the staff or the projects or the information that they need as it comes to the DDOT programs and projects and policies and everything. So Kelly Jong Olson is the lead of that team, and each ward has one dedicated person that folks can reach out to if you have a question about any project. Rather than trying to go to one staff member you may or may not know, they've got a dedicated team for people to reach out to for your specific ward.
There's a lot of literature on bike stuff. I would suggest that this be one of the paper flyers that you put out there. How does it work? Not just online, but the TSI is a core issue and a core tool, and yet there's wide misunderstanding or confusion on how it works. Sorry to interject, Eileen, here.
That's okay. Let's just talk. I think that we only have a couple minutes left, but let's talk about what it means for work to be data driven. You know, there are gaps in data. You know, and just as an example, I'll note that, you know, crash data, and this is not just a DC problem, but crash data doesn't generally include information about disability, just people with disabilities involved in crashes. That's just one example. But how do we, what are the biggest gaps in data that you think we have, and what do we need to do to address them?
I think there's a couple of things. So generally, wherever there's an injury or a fatality, we know where that happened. A police report is filed, police, fire, EMS respond. So we know about that. Where we don't know as well are minor injuries, even no injury crashes sometimes get undercounted because people don't want to report it, or they don't feel comfortable reporting it or safe reporting it, or they just don't know how. So there are ways you can go to if you're struck by a vehicle, even if an officer doesn't respond, you can go to your local district to file a police report so that it can be part of our data. Risky conditions are something that we know what they are. We look at the traffic data, the crash data that we have, and not only like as a data point, but what is the context of that data point as well. I think where we need data are more up-to-date and frequent traffic volume numbers, traffic intersection numbers. That is the basis of what streets are designed off of. And oftentimes they're designed off of pre-existing data, pre-COVID data even. So because of the massive changes that we've seen in commuting patterns, that's some key data that informs design, which then has safety impacts or outcomes. That's all part of the equation as well. I think there's definitely a lot of research in terms of behavior and things that we need as well.
Okay. I'll just note here that, legally speaking, pedestrians and bicyclists are both included within the definition of traffic. So getting, the counts of us is also important.
Absolutely.
Heather, did you want to go to audience Q&A, or do you want me to keep going? You're muted.
Let me just take a look here. There were several questions for Charles Turner, but he has had to leave early. Eileen, why don't you just go ahead with one other while I scan again.
Okay. So when I was reading the Vision Zero report, Christine, one of the points that I saw was that during, I guess it was the early years of COVID, injuries went down, but fatalities went up. And the hypothesis, which personally I think is logical, is that is because of increased speeds. That, in other words, more people who might have been injured before are now being killed because of increased speeds. So is that holding true, continuing to hold true, do you know, for more recent?
I mean, speeding is still an issue. We've seen a lot of overnight crashes,
Right.
especially related to speeding and having the appropriate reaction time to yield or whatever. So it is still somewhat true. We are seeing during the pandemic, we saw obviously because of volumes being lower in our downtown and people being fewer in our downtown, we saw fewer crashes there. Now we're starting to see Ward 2 popping up as a crash hotspot because so many people are returning to downtown. So that's one really critical piece. If I could just put a plug in, as we're adding these 15,000 new residents to our downtown, we really have to make sure that our streets are safest and allow people to move around outside of a car.
Do you know if injuries are staying down, continuing to decrease? And fatalities are up, so.
They were trending down previously. I think this year to date, we're up. So
Okay.
we're seeing some alarming trends right now that we're trying to get ahead of.
And it's sort of related on the data, but a different point that doesn't get talked about a lot is the issue of hit and run crashes. When it seems like in the last couple of years, when I read MPD's press releases on fatal crashes, there's a lot more hit and runs than there were previously. And I know the Vision Zero report talked about how I think it was 40% of fatal crashes are hit and runs or a driver hitting a fixed object. What do you have a sense of what we're seeing? And I know this is mostly MPD, but do you have a sense in terms of the data, what we're seeing in terms of hit and runs this year? And
This year, it's hard to say. I don't know how many of the criminal investigations are complete on that, but during COVID, that was absolutely a trend that we saw, where people were hitting things and running off the road or whatever, or people hitting things or people and leaving the scene. And it does continue to be an issue. It's a big issue, because we can't hold that person accountable. So that's more of like an MPD and sort of Office of the Attorney General question, but
yeah. Although, I mean, it's also plays in here because it's, in all honesty, when we're also dealing with, cars with fake plates and all of that. And it seems to me like engineering is the only way we're going to stop some of these people. So it makes engineering all the more important and puts a bigger burden on DDOT.
I mean, and Christine, we're going to turn to a couple questions, comments from the public. The first, I'm going to read them both out for you, Christine, and then you can take it. What construction changes might we expect to see in the next year or so from Vision Zero interventions, particularly on the wide, high-speed arterial avenues that are most of the high injury network? That's number one. And the second, from somebody who follows the safety issues very closely, MPD reports have been found to be inaccurate and do not look at safety or road design. At best, they may identify a section with problems. They do not collect information on safety or avoidance. This has been the experience on the Bicycle Advisory Council. We need DDOT to look at accident sites. So those are the two. We just have 5 minutes left. So if you could do your best, Christine, and I just want to commend you. I thought the slides were great. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So in terms of activity on the high injury network, we are working really closely across DDOT and across DDOT programs. The bus priority being a huge one, a huge opportunity to implement safety on a lot of these arterials as bus service is improving. We've got dedicated projects, two of which I'm leading, one for Southern Avenue on a very crash dense, fatality dense area between Pennsylvania and Benning Road. We're hoping to construct that later this year to implement some safety features there. And Good Hope Road as well, or Marionberry Ave. Now that'll receive some safety treatments later this year, early next year to curb speeding. So there are dedicated programs coming out that we're sort of forming as we speak to address high injury network segments, especially those that are not covered by other TDOT programs currently. And then for MPD reports, I hear what you're saying. So every critical crash and fatality crash, we do a multidisciplinary review of that crash site, the conditions that led to that crash within about 24 hours or the next business day, beyond what DDOT roadway operations does to sort of restore things. We have a staff member, engineer or planner, visit that site, take pictures, meet with the MPD officer, learn what happened in that crash, document what is on the street, and then later that week, that following Friday, kudos to Charlie for setting up this process. We take a multidisciplinary review of that location and determine what could have, if anything, prevented that crash. And if not, what are other safety features that we could add that would improve the safety in general at that location? So this is critical crash locations that may not be a fatality, but maybe a major injury, as well as fatality locations. And this is in addition to this sort of corridor-wide work that we're doing.
We have 1 minute for one last interesting point here from the questions. Hybrid and pure electric cars weigh more than internal combustion powered vehicles. As a higher percentage of heavier electric vehicles use our streets, what are the expected results? Unfortunately, whatever you can do in 1 minute, Christine.
Well, let's see. There's a couple things here. Jennifer Hamady has a really great keynote about this for TRB, so I encourage everyone to go and look at that. But we've got to meet our safety goals as well as our climate goals. Electric vehicles are not the silver bullet for everything. We need to look at vehicle size, weight, and their sustainability if we're ever going to meet safety and climate goals. How's that for 1 minute?
Great. So I would like to thank very much the panelists for agreeing to join this panel.